Nothing collapses all at once. It happens quietly, in transitions so small they feel harmless. By the time people agree something has changed, the structure has already shifted beneath them. Every large breakdown in history follows the same sequence, not because of fate, but because human systems carry the same internal pressures wherever they appear. At first, everything looks stable. Markets function, institutions meet, laws remain in place. Daily routines continue with familiar rhythm. From the outside, nothing seems broken, but inside the system, stress begins to accumulate in places most people never see. Small compromises are made to preserve comfort. Temporary fixes become permanent habits. Complexity grows faster than understanding. This is where the pattern begins. Systems expand until they can no longer be fully understood by the people inside them. Responsibility fragments. Decisions become distributed across committees, departments, and procedures. No single person feels in control, and because no one feels in control, no one feels accountable. The structure keeps moving forward through inertia alone. Then comes the first transition. Not collapse. Adjustment. A policy is softened. A standard is lowered. An exception is granted. Each change feels reasonable on its own. Each one is justified as necessary, practical, even compassionate. But together, they slowly reshape the foundation. The system adapts to pressure by bending its own rules. At this stage, most participants still believe in the core promise. They trust the framework. They assume corrections will arrive when needed. After all, the system has survived challenges before. It has recovered from shocks. It has absorbed crises. Past success becomes evidence that future stability is guaranteed. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. What makes this phase dangerous is not chaos. It is normality. Trains run. Offices open. Contracts are signed. News cycles move on. People continue planning birthdays, careers, and retirements. Collapse does not announce itself with sirens. It blends into ordinary life. The second transition is psychological. Gradually, confidence shifts from substance to appearance. Metrics replace meaning. Performance indicators stand in for real health. Leaders learn to manage perception instead of structure. Reports become more polished even as foundations thin. When outcomes disappoint, explanations grow longer. Language becomes abstract. Responsibility dissolves into process. Meanwhile, collective behavior adjusts. People notice inconsistencies, but they also notice that everyone else seems calm. They interpret silence as reassurance. Doubt becomes private. Public conversation grows cautious. Nobody wants to be the first to suggest that something essential is weakening. By now, the system is no longer optimizing for resilience. It is optimizing for continuity. Keeping things running becomes a primary goal, even if running means drifting further from the original purpose. And this is the quiet center of every collapse. Not the crash, not the panic. The moment when stability becomes performance, when adaptation replaces correction, and when an entire structure begins moving forward on momentum alone. From here, outcomes are shaped less by decisions and more by accumulated compromises. The path is not dramatic. It is procedural. It unfolds through meetings, memos, and routine approvals. What follows always feels sudden, but it never is. It was written long before now. In ancient empires, the sequence was already visible. Administrations grew dense, tax systems complex, trade routes stretched across continents. Power concentrated in capitals while distance separated decision-makers from consequences. At first, expansion felt like strength, borders widened, wealth circulated, art and engineering flourished. But inside those achievements, the same pressures accumulated. Rome adjusted its currency when silver became scarce. Dynasties in China rotated officials to maintain control. Medieval kingdoms layered privileges and exemptions to keep alliances intact. Each system invented its own tools, yet the internal logic was identical. When resources tightened, structures compensated with policy. When legitimacy weakened, ceremony intensified. When cohesion faded, bureaucracy multiplied. No empire collapsed the moment it peaked. There was always a long plateau afterward, a period where monuments were still built, armies still marched, and laws were still enforced. From the outside, continuity looked convincing. From the inside, people sensed fatigue, but lacked a language for it. Financial systems followed the same arc. Banking networks expanded to support commerce. Credit filled gaps between production and consumption. Insurance spread risk across populations. These innovations increased prosperity, but they also created layers of abstraction. Value became symbolic. Obligation stretched forward in time. Responsibility dissolved across balance sheets. When strain appeared, authorities responded with refinements. New instruments were introduced. Accounting standards were revised. Oversight bodies were formed. Each reform addressed symptoms while leaving core dependencies untouched. Complexity became both shield and blindfold. Institutions learned to survive stress by redistributing it. Losses moved from private actors to public ledgers. Mistakes were reframed as external shocks. Language softened outcomes that once carried consequences. Over time, this trained collective behavior. Participants stopped expecting closure. They learned to live with unresolved imbalances. What makes these periods difficult to recognize is that progress continues alongside decay. Libraries open. Universities graduate students. Infrastructure expands. People fall in love, start businesses, and raise families. History does not pause while structures weaken. Psychological blindness grows in parallel. Familiar routines dull perception. When anomalies appear, they are treated as temporary. Experts debate models. Committees request more data. By the time agreement forms, momentum has already shifted. Across centuries, the pattern remains consistent. Systems grow, adapt, stretch, and normalize their own distortions. Individuals inside them act rationally according to local incentives. Nobody wakes up intending to preside over decline. They simply manage what is directly in front of them. Near the end of these phases, narratives become circular. Explanations repeat. Accountability disperses. Trust moves from outcomes to process. If these patterns feel familiar, you might want to stay with the channel, because this is exactly what we unpack here. Collapse, when it finally arrives, rarely feels like revelation. It feels like paperwork catching up. The lesson history offers is not drama. It is structure. Different cultures, different eras, same sequence. Not driven by villains, but by accumulation. Not by single decisions, but by thousands of small accommodations. And always, the most dangerous moment is when continuity still looks convincing. People interpret persistence as proof, motion as progress, and procedure as safety, even as foundations thin and quiet transitions continue beneath everyday conversations in shared spaces everywhere. Inside every large system, feedback travels slowly. Information moves through layers, filters, and incentives before it reaches anyone with authority. By the time a signal becomes visible at the top, it has already been softened by reports, summaries, and interpretations. What arrives is not reality, but a negotiated version of it. Trust erodes first, but quietly. People stop assuming that outcomes reflect effort. They begin to suspect that rules apply unevenly. Small inconsistencies accumulate in daily interactions. Forms take longer. Calls go unanswered. Decisions feel arbitrary. None of this feels catastrophic. It feels administrative. At the same time, institutions develop inertia. Procedures exist to preserve stability, not to question direction. Careers are built on continuity. Budgets depend on precedent. Every department learns to protect its own scope. When stress appears, the safest response is delay. Schedule another review. Commission another study. Move the decision to the next quarter. Delayed reactions become a feature, not a flaw. This is how systems teach people to adapt psychologically. Individuals narrow their focus to what they can influence. They optimize locally. They meet targets. They follow protocols. Over time, this trains attention away from the whole. Structural shifts become background noise. Most participants are not blind. They notice changes, but they also notice that challenging them carries cost. Raising concerns introduces friction. Questioning assumptions risks isolation. So doubt becomes private and compliance becomes social. Collective behavior emerges from this silence. Each person waits for confirmation from others. Each assumes someone else has a broader view. Responsibility diffuses across titles and task lists. The system keeps moving even as confidence thins. Another mechanism appears here: normalization. What once felt temporary becomes routine. Emergency measures are extended. Interim policies linger. Exceptional practices settle into standard operating procedure. Memory shortens. New entrants learn the altered version as if it were original. Meanwhile, language adapts. Problems are reframed as challenges. Losses become adjustments. Constraints are described as opportunities. Vocabulary smooths edges. Emotional distance grows. This does not happen through deception. It happens through habit. In this phase, collapse is not experienced as approach. It is experienced as workload. People spend more time managing complexity and less time questioning direction. They become skilled at navigating forms, platforms, and compliance pathways. Mastery of process replaces understanding of purpose. Efficiency improves while coherence fades. And because everything still functions, because paychecks clear and services operate, it feels unreasonable to suggest that anything fundamental is changing. But beneath the surface, trust continues to thin. Each unresolved discrepancy adds weight. Each postponed decision compounds pressure. The structure absorbs strain until it cannot. The final transition is rarely noticed in real time. It is marked by exhaustion, not alarm. Meetings feel heavier. Communications grow cautious. Creativity narrows. What remains is motion without conviction. By the time recognition arrives, the system has already taught participants how to live inside imbalance. They did not miss the moment. They were trained to move past it, not through malice, but through repetition, routine, and reward, until adaptation felt normal, imbalance felt manageable, and the quiet distance between intention and outcome widened one ordinary day at a time. In the modern world, the same sequence unfolds through markets, governments, and corporations, not as a single event, but as a series of quiet accommodations. Supply chains stretch across oceans. Digital platforms mediate trust. Financial products grow more intricate than the goods they represent. Each layer promises efficiency, yet each layer also places distance between cause and consequence. Organizations respond to pressure by optimizing metrics. Growth is tracked in dashboards. Risk is modeled in spreadsheets. Performance is translated into charts. The system appears measurable, even as meaning becomes abstract. When outcomes diverge from expectations, explanations arrive in technical language that few outside the room can challenge. Meanwhile, everyday life continues. Offices open. Packages arrive. Services renew automatically. People adapt to new interfaces, new rules, new fees. Changes arrive in increments small enough to absorb. What once felt unusual becomes familiar within a single billing cycle. Here, normalization does its quiet work. Signals surface, then fade. A volatility spike, a service interruption, a regulatory adjustment. Each is framed as temporary. Each is followed by reassurance. The collective learns to move on. Attention resets. Memory shortens. Institutions, designed to provide stability, begin prioritizing continuity over correction. Processes multiply. Oversight expands. Yet responsibility remains diffuse. Decisions pass through layers of approval until they lose their edge. What matters most becomes keeping systems operational, even if the purpose that created them grows distant. Inside large organizations, people become specialists in fragments. One team manages compliance. Another handles customer sentiment. Another models exposure. Each does their job well. Few are positioned to see the whole. And because the parts appear functional, the whole is assumed to be sound. Markets reflect this psychology. Prices respond to narratives as much as fundamentals. Confidence becomes contagious. So does hesitation. Participants watch one another more than they watch structures. Motion itself becomes a signal. Governments mirror the pattern. Policies are introduced to address immediate pressures. Temporary measures persist. Reviews are scheduled. Task forces convene. Language grows careful. The system absorbs shock by spreading it across time and population. What rises here is not panic. It is fatigue. People sense that something essential has become harder to name. Trust feels thinner, but life remains busy. There is always another update, another form, another revision to navigate. Energy is spent on adaptation, not reflection, and so the sequence advances through ordinary days. No speeches announce it. No alarms interrupt routines. The transition is administrative, procedural, and gradual. It lives in revised terms of service, adjusted thresholds, and redefined baselines. By the time tension becomes visible, it has already been present for years, embedded in workflows and expectations. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. The present is not unique. It is simply another verse in a long pattern of systems growing complex, stretching trust, and teaching the participants to normalize imbalance until continuity itself becomes a goal and coherence fades quietly behind performance. For those living inside it, the shift rarely feels historic. It feels procedural, like adapting to forms and expectations, until the distance between what was promised and what is delivered becomes part of the background, accepted without ceremony. The final phase is not collapse. It is realization. It arrives unevenly, in private moments rather than public announcements. Someone notices a service that no longer works the way it used to. Someone else feels the weight of paperwork that once felt simple. Conversations change tone. Expectations quietly adjust downward. The structure has already moved. Awareness is only catching up. At this point, people search for causes. They point to events, personalities, policies. But those are surface expressions. The deeper story is accumulation. Years of small deferrals. Layers of abstraction. Incentives that favored speed over resilience. Appearance over substance. Continuity over coherence. Every system teaches its participants how to behave inside it. Over time, that training becomes invisible. People learn what is rewarded. They learn what is ignored. They learn when silence is safer than clarity. None of this requires coordination. It emerges from repetition. What follows is not a dramatic ending. It is a long settling. Structures shed complexity they can no longer support. Promises narrow. Standards quietly reset. Roles are redefined. Some institutions persist in reduced form. Others merge, fragment, or fade. Life continues through all of it. Children still go to school. Work still fills calendars. Even in transition, the world keeps its ordinary shape. This is why collapse is so often misunderstood. We imagine it as rupture. History shows it as drift. The pattern does not depend on technology or ideology. It appears in empires built on stone and in networks built on code. Different tools, same phases. Expansion, optimization, strain, normalization, and finally, acceptance. Acceptance is not agreement. It is adjustment. People recalibrate what they expect from systems, from institutions, from one another. They lower the bar without announcing it. They find new routines. They carry forward. From a distance, later generations will draw clean lines across timelines. They will name turning points and summarize eras. From the inside, there are only days. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Every collapse follows this exact sequence because it begins long before it becomes visible and unfolds through collective behavior more than singular decisions. It moves through trust before it moves through markets. It passes through language before it reaches balance sheets. The quiet truth is that no one is ever standing at the edge, waiting for the moment. People are always in the middle, adapting. And that is the unsettling part. Not that systems fail, but that they teach us to live inside their failures so gradually that by the time the pattern is clear, it already feels familiar. Records will be archived. Explanations will be written. Experts will debate interpretations. But lived experience resists summaries. It exists in altered habits, in smaller expectations, in patience that replaces certainty. People do not mark the passage with ceremonies. They absorb it through schedules, receipts, notifications, and a steady recalibration of what feels normal again. The end is never loud. It is absorbed, distributed, and normalized until what once would have felt unthinkable becomes simply how things are, and the sequence closes not with a crash, but with a collective exhale that no one remembers starting.